Well now, good evening, friends. Andy Taylor here. It's a beautiful spring evening in Mayberry, and I've got the porch light on, sitting here in my favorite rocking chair. You know, spring always was a special time in our little town. The dogwoods would bloom, the air would get warm, and folks would start spending more time outside, visiting with their neighbors. Tonight, I want to tell you about something that happened in the spring of 1955, something that had the whole town buzzing for weeks. It's a story about my Aunt Bee, and a mystery that turned out to be one of the sweetest things I ever witnessed. Let me take you back to that spring, Dot. It was early April, and Mayberry was coming alive after a long winter. Aunt Bee had been living with Opie and me for about 3 years by then, keeping house and taking care of us. She was a wonderful woman, my Aunt Bee. Always had a kind word for everyone, always baking something delicious, always making sure folks felt welcome in her home. She was involved in everything in town, the church choir, the garden club, the ladies' auxiliary. If something needed doing in Mayberry, you could count on Aunt Bee to be right there helping Dot well. On a Thursday morning in early April, I came down to breakfast and found Aunt Bee sitting at the kitchen table with the most peculiar expression on her face. She was holding an envelope, and she had this little smile, but she also looked confused. "Morning, Aunt Bee," I said, pouring myself some coffee. "Everything all right?" "Oh, Andy," she said, looking up at me. "The strangest thing just happened. I found this letter in the mailbox this morning. It's addressed to me, but there's no return address. And look at this." She handed me the envelope. It was a nice cream-colored envelope, the kind you might use for a special occasion. My aunt's name was written in beautiful handwriting, very old-fashioned and careful. "Miss Beatrice Taylor," it said, and our address. The postmark was from Mayberry, mailed just the day before. I opened it up and pulled out a single sheet of matching stationery. On it was a short poem, written in that same careful handwriting. I won't recite the whole thing, but it was about springtime and new beginnings, and how some memories stay with us forever. At the bottom, instead of a signature, it just said, "A friend from long ago." "Well," I said, reading it over again, "this is certainly interesting. Do you have any idea who might have sent this?" Aunt Bee shook her head. "I've been sitting here trying to think, but I just can't imagine. The handwriting looks familiar somehow, but I can't quite place it. And who would sign it 'a friend from long ago'? I have lots of old friends, but why wouldn't they just sign their name?" "It is curious," I agreed, "but it's a nice poem. Maybe someone's just being thoughtful." Aunt Bee smiled. "It is nice, isn't it? I haven't received a poem since I was quite young." She blushed a little. "It's rather romantic, actually." The next week, another letter arrived. This one had another poem, also about spring, about remembering happy times, about courage and second chances. Again, it was signed simply, "A friend from long ago." Aunt Bee was both delighted and perplexed. She showed it to Clara at the beauty parlor, and by that afternoon, half the women in town knew about the mysterious letters. By the third letter, which arrived the following week, everyone in Mayberry was talking about Aunt Bee's secret admirer. The third poem was even more personal, mentioning things like the smell of apple pie and the sound of laughter in a school hallway. Aunt Bee was beside herself trying to figure out who it could be. Barney, of course, had his own theories. He came into the courthouse one morning, waving a notepad. "Andy," he said, "I've been conducting an investigation into Aunt Bee's secret admirer situation." "An investigation?" I asked, trying not to smile. "Barney, don't you think that's a bit much?" "This is serious, Andy," he said. "We're dealing with an anonymous correspondent here. Could be anyone. Could be dangerous." "Dangerous?" I said. "Barney, they're poems." "Love poems, Andy?" Barney said, lowering his voice. That makes it even more suspicious. I think we need to set up a stack out. A stack out? At the mailbox. We'll catch this person red-handed when they deliver the next letter. I don't think that's necessary, Barney, I said. Whoever this is, they're being respectful. They're mailing the letters through the post office. It's not like they're sneaking around. That's exactly what they want you to think, Barney said, tapping his notepad. But I'm on to them. The fourth letter arrived on a Monday, and this one was different. Along with the poem, there was a small pressed flower, a violet. The poem mentioned walking home from school on spring days, carrying books, and being too shy to say what was in the heart. Aunt B read that one over and over. Andy, she said to me that evening, I think I'm starting to remember something. There was a boy in high school. We were in the same class. He was very quiet, very kind. His name was Henry Becker. He used to walk the same way home that I did, and sometimes we'd talk about our classes, about books we were reading. But he was so shy, and I was too, I suppose. We never said anything beyond friendly conversation. But I always thought he was nice. I remember he had the most beautiful handwriting. He would write poetry in the margins of his notebooks during English class. Do you think Henry Becker is sending these letters? I asked. I don't know, Aunt B said. I lost touch with him after high school. I heard he moved away, got married. I hadn't thought about him in years until these letters started arriving. But that handwriting, Andy, the more I look at it, the more I think it might be his. Well, I said, maybe we can find out. Do you know if he's still in the area? I have no idea, Aunt B admitted. Like I said, I lost track of him decades ago. The next day, I did a little quiet asking around. It turned out that Henry Becker had indeed moved away after high school, had lived in Raleigh for many years, and had been married for quite a while. His wife had passed away about 2 years earlier, and word was that Henry had moved back to the area, to Mount Pilot, just a few towns over. He was retired now, living quietly. I didn't mention any of this to Aunt B just yet. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. The fifth letter arrived that Friday. This one was longer than the others. The poem talked about regrets, about words left unspoken, about wondering what might have been if courage had been greater. It talked about seeing someone's kindness shine through the years, hearing about their goodness from mutual acquaintances, and wanting to finally say something that should have been said long ago. At the end, after a friend from long ago, there was a postscript. It said, if you would be willing to meet for coffee at Walker's drugstore on Saturday at 2 o'clock, I would be honored. If not, I understand, and I will treasure these weeks of writing to you. Well, Aunt B was in quite a state. She must have changed her mind a dozen times about whether to go. What if it's not Henry? She fretted. What if it's someone I don't even know? What if it is Henry, and he's disappointed when he sees me? Andy, I'm not the young girl he knew in high school. I'm 63 years old. Aunt B, I said gently, whoever this person is, they've seen you recently. They know what you look like now. They've been thinking about you as you are now, not as you were 40-some years ago. And if it is Henry Becker, then he's also 63 years old, and I imagine he's thinking the same things you are. After much deliberation, Aunt B decided she would go. Saturday afternoon came, and I have never seen my aunt spend so much time getting ready. She must have tried on 5 different dresses before settling on a nice blue one with white flowers. She fussed with her hair until it was just right. She was nervous as a cat. I offered to walk with her to the drugstore, but she said no. This was something she needed to do by herself. I watched from the porch as she walked down the street, holding her purse with both hands, taking deep breaths. I sent up a little prayer that whoever was waiting for her would be kind. About 3 hours later, Aunt Bee came home. She had the brightest smile on her face that I'd seen in a long time. "It was Henry," she said, taking off her hat. It was Henry Becker. He's been living in Mount Pilot for the past year, and he'd heard through old mutual friends that I was here in Mayberry with you. He's been wanting to reach out, but didn't know how. Didn't know if I'd remember him or if I'd want to hear from him. So he started writing the letters. She sat down in the living room, still smiling. He said he'd been thinking about me for years, wondering what happened to the nice girl who used to walk home from school with him. When his wife passed, he started thinking even more about old times, about paths not taken. He wanted to see if there might be a chance for us to be friends again, after all these years. And I asked, "What happened at the drugstore?" "We talked for 3 hours, Andy," she said. 3 hours, and it felt like no time at all. We talked about high school, about our lives, about what we've done all these years. He's such a kind man, just as kind as I remembered. He apologized for being anonymous with the letters, said he didn't want to presume, didn't want to force himself into my life if I wasn't interested. But oh, Andy, those poems were beautiful. She pulled them out of her purse. She'd brought them all with her to the drugstore. He said he'd been working on them for weeks, trying to get them just right. I could see she was genuinely happy, and that made me happy. Over the next few months, Henry Becker became a regular visitor to Mayberry. He'd drive over from Mount Pilot once or twice a week, and he and Aunt Bee would go for walks, or sit on the porch, or go to church socials together. He was a gentleman, always polite, always thoughtful. I got to know him pretty well, and I liked him. He was good for Aunt Bee, and she was good for him. They never did get married, which surprised some folks in town, but Aunt Bee explained it to me one evening. "Andy," she said, "Henry and I have both had full lives. We've both loved and lost. At our age, we're not looking to start over or change everything. We're just happy to have found friendship again, to have someone who understands us, who shares our memories. That's enough. That's more than enough." And you know, I think she was right. Not every love story has to end in marriage. Sometimes the best endings are about companionship, about having someone to talk to, someone who cares. Henry and Aunt Bee had that, and it was beautiful to watch. The story of Aunt Bee's secret admirer became one of those tales that folks in Mayberry loved to tell. People thought it was the most romantic thing that had happened in town in years. Even Barney admitted, though grudgingly, that maybe his stackout hadn't been necessary after all. The ladies at the garden club were all envious of Aunt Bee's poetry, and more than one of them hinted to their own husbands that a romantic letter now and then wouldn't go amiss. I learned something from watching that whole situation unfold. I learned that it's never too late to say something you should have said, never too late to reach out to someone from your past. Henry Becker had been carrying those feelings for 40 years, afraid he'd missed his chance. But he took a risk, wrote those letters, and it brought real joy into both their lives. Sometimes courage comes late, but it still counts. There's also something to be said for patience and gentleness in approaching matters of the heart. Henry didn't come barging into Aunt Bee's life, demanding attention. He was thoughtful and respectful, giving her the choice to respond or not. That kind of consideration is rare and valuable. And Aunt Bee, for her part, was open to the possibility of rekindling an old friendship. She could have dismissed the letters, been too proud or too scared to meet him, but she took her own risk, and it paid off. Those two spent many happy hours together over the years that followed. They'd sit on our porch in the evenings, Henry in the spare rocking chair, talking about old times and new thoughts. Sometimes they'd go quiet for long stretches, just enjoying the crickets and the evening air. That's the kind of comfort you can only have with someone who truly knows you. Henry passed away about 10 years after he and Aunt Bee reconnected. It was peaceful, in his sleep, the way anyone would want to go. Aunt Bee took it hard, but she told me she had no regrets. Those 10 years, she said, were a gift I never expected. I'm so grateful Henry had the courage to write those letters. I'm so grateful I had the sense to meet him at Walker's. We were given a second chapter that most people don't get, and I'll treasure it always. She kept all his letters in a wooden box in her room. Sometimes I'd see her reading them again, smiling at the memories. You know, looking back on it now, that whole situation reminded me that life is full of second chances if we're brave enough to take them. It reminded me that the human heart doesn't stop hoping or dreaming just because we get older. Aunt Bee was in her 60s when those letters started arriving, but she felt like a young girl again, excited about the possibility of connection. And Henry, working up the courage to write those poems, was proving that romance and thoughtfulness don't have an expiration date. We sometimes think that certain things are only for young people, that older folks are past all that. But that's not true. The need for companionship, for being understood, for being cared about, that never goes away. If anything, it becomes more important as we get older. I'm glad Henry Becker came back into Aunt Bee's life. I'm glad he wrote those poems, and I'm glad she had the courage to meet him. They gave each other something precious, those two. They gave each other proof that they were remembered, that they had mattered to someone all along. In a world that can sometimes feel cold and forgetful, that's a powerful gift. So if there's someone from your past you've been thinking about, someone you wish you'd said something to, maybe this story will encourage you to reach out. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe they've been thinking about you too. And even if nothing comes of it, at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll have been brave enough to speak your heart. Well now, that's the story of Aunt Bee's secret admirer, the mysterious letters that turned out to be from an old friend with a poet's heart. Spring in Mayberry was never quite the same after that. Folks looked at each other a little differently, wondered about old connections, old possibilities. And every time I see violets blooming, I think of Henry Becker and his careful handwriting, and the joy that came from finally saying what had been left unsaid for too long. I hope you enjoyed that story, friends. Come back and visit again real soon. Until then, this is Andy Taylor saying goodnight from Mayberry. Take care now, and don't be afraid to tell folks they matter to you. Life's too short to leave important words unspoken.